not a fair trade. Wow. As you said, my name is Jonathan Lammers, and I traveled 2,600 and some odd miles to be here with you tonight. I live in Tallahassee now, but I lived for about 20 years in San Francisco. During that time, I worked at Page & Turnbull, which is a preservation architecture firm, and I ended up at the planning department where I worked on their historic survey and landmark designation team. So even though I live in Florida, a lot of my work is still here. I feel, at least for the last 6 weeks, that I've been living down in Dogpatch. It's very wonderful to come here and visit places that I've been looking at historic photos from the 1890s and early 1900s. And this is a great crowd, and I have to say I'm completely intimidated. It's not only the biggest crowd that I've spoken to for a historic program, but this is a really knowledgeable group, and I'm afraid that I'm going to be redundant and saying things that you all already know, so forgive me for that. But I'm also hoping there's going to be some little nuggets that can help tell you about your own neighborhood. And I really want to thank Catherine and Peter and Enrique for bringing me out. This is a real joy and one of the rare opportunities I get to speak to a group of people like this, so thank you. Now, I'm going to warn you, I'm a historian. I wouldn't do what I do unless I get to go off on some tangents, but hopefully they're interesting ones, and I love historic images, and so I've got about 100 slides that I'm going to try and run through with you, but we're visual creatures, right? We like to see lots of pictures. I also really like to understand the context of the buildings that I work on, and so I like to go back to the beginning, not quite to Let There Be Light beginning, but back in time. But let's start right now. This is a view, obviously, of the Dogpatch area, or Potrero Point, if we're going to be historically accurate. As most of you know, this is one of the greatest concentrations of heavy industry on planet Earth in its day. And the evolution of this area helps explain why the police station was there. And you may not realize, but the smaller building to the left of it was the Potrero Emergency Hospital. It's not all the police stations, so I'm going to talk about the history of both of these. But like I said, I like to step back. I don't know why this slide is turned slightly on itself, but that arrow is pointing to the police station, and this is a current satellite view. And the amount of landfill and land forming that happened at Potrero Point is extraordinary. So we're going to step back in time a little bit. That's pointing to the same spot. This is the 1857 Coast Survey map. And now we're back to 1857. We can see that there are very few buildings. In the lower left-hand corner, we see something that says powder magazines. Down there, just some little black rectangles. That was the DuPont company, or the EI DuPont de Nemours company. They manufactured black powder. We're actually before dynamite at that point, and that was a very dangerous thing to manufacture. So they moved out to Potrero Point. And then you see a long black rectangle. That's the rope walk for Tubbs Cordage. That is a covered shed that's 1,500 feet long, and they're manufacturing rope. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. Here's the same map, and you can see Mission Bay is a little bit different than it is today. It's a big half moon there, stretching from what was called Rincon Point in the south of Market, sort of about where 3rd and Berry Street is today. And then the point on the far end, that was about where 16th Street terminates today. And then Mission Creek is moving inland. And Mission Creek actually went very far inland. At this point, the Potrero is a peninsula. It's got Islas Creek coming in on Presida Creek on one side and Mission Creek on the other. And there is a wall across the neck, and it is called the Potrero Nuevo, which is the new pasture. Potrero just means grazing land or pasture. The Potrero Viejo, or the old pasture, was Bernal Heights, but the Potrero is the new one. And it's the new one because it is owned by the sons of this gentleman. That is Francisco de Haro, and his two sons, Ramon and Francisco Jr., were granted the Potrero Nuevo in 1841. And unfortunately, they were killed about 5 years later by Kit Carson during the Bear Flag Rebellion. And so it reverted back to Dad, who owned it, but he died in 1849, which was a very auspicious time to pass away in San Francisco. For quite some time, squatters were taking over the land. The family fought it, and their land grant was finally affirmed in the 1860s. But like a lot of Spanish landowners, they often paid their attorneys in land, and the attorneys usually ended up with the entire land grant right about the time that it was confirmed that they owned it. And that was a great way to make money in Gold Rush Bay Area history, was to represent one of the old Spanish landowners. So we can come back to this 1857 survey map. There's the roadblock. As I said, that's Tubbs Cordage. There's a picture of Tubbs Cordage. I think that's probably from the early 1880s. They manufactured, as I said, rope. They made some of the biggest ropes in the world. This is their display for the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition, showing off their skill in making cordage. And if you ever go down there there's actually a Tubbs Street in Dogpatch today. Do you see those buildings at that strange angle? That's still the old survey for Tubbs Cordage. They were just built along those old lot lines, and that's why they stick out at such a strange angle today. So we're seeing an echo that's 160 plus years old. To get out to the Potrero back in the day, it was a pretty circuitous route. You had to go around Mission Creek, and there was a little bridge basically about where 16th and Treat is today. That's where the creek was. You know, when you come down off the hill there by the park heading into the Mission, you can feel you're coming off the hill. That's about where that bridge was. You came all the way out to the point, but that's a long way to go. So we need to fix that. So we're going to build a bridge. The 1860s was a really important era in San Francisco because this was the Silver Rush. The Silver Rush was far larger than the Gold Rush in terms of money it brought to San Francisco, and a lot of new investment. And one of those investments was the Long Bridge. The concession was granted in 1862. They started in 1865. It came out the line of 4th Street, then turned on the line of 3rd Street, landed in Potrero Point, and went all the way down to the Bayview racetrack. Here's a picture from Potrero Point where you can see it at right, and then there's a wharf coming off to the left where it's deep water where some ships can attach to it. This is a fairly early picture because they haven't started filling the land along it. Here's another view from Nob Hill. So it's quite an undertaking. It's also the catalyst for the filling that's going to take place in Mission Bay. Here's a view from on the bridge, and we're looking towards Potrero Point. And you can see that at this point, what's 3rd Street, originally Kentucky Street, later Railroad Street, is basically sitting in a canyon. Here's another picture of the bridge. People are fishing for smelt. There were still good runs in the bay at that point. And here's a view. This is from 1868, and you can see Potrero Point is out on the right-hand side, and there's not much going on there yet. There's a little bit of building, but that is all going to change very rapidly because now that we've got great access to Potrero Point, we can start building things there, and the things that we're going to build are things that we can't build elsewhere in the city. We need some land that's apart. So this is just 10 years later, and we can see now that the line of the bridge is being filled. It's actually becoming dirt, and if you look out on Potrero Point, which is at the upper left, we see a lot of smokestacks. It's already becoming the heavy industrial powerhouse that it's going to be, and there's several firms that are responsible for that. That's just a blow up so you can see. God bless San Francisco maps and things like that. It is such a joy to work as a historian here, particularly in this era. It is a golden age, the availability of maps that have been scanned and photos that have been scanned, and the ability to look at old newspapers makes this a joy. So this is one of the first spots. This is called, they called it Rolling Mill Point, I believe this is how this is captioned. This is, I think, an Edward Moorbridge photo. Take a look at the cliffs relative to the shoreline there. This is basically where the Union Iron Works is going to be. I mean, look at that. Look at those houses up on that hill. It's incredible. So this is really the first big heavy industry. This is Pacific Rolling Mills, and this photo is taken around 1880 or so. And then They were followed very quickly by the Potrero Gas Works. This is a much later photo, but they were the second people to come to Potrero Point, and they merged with a bunch of different companies, and eventually this is going to be PG&E, but we'll get to that a little bit more. Then around 1881, Klaus Spreckels builds the California Sugar Refinery, later the Western Sugar Refinery, as most of you know it. And then 1883, we have Union Iron Works. Take a look at this little road. This is the landing of the 3rd Street Bridge at lower right, the tracks, and then they've got a spur track that is running over to the ironworks. Look at that bridge, and then that arrow is pointing to that same bridge. This is taken a few years later. Take a look at the filling and how fast it happened. What they're doing is they're cutting down the hills, and they're using them for fill. But it happened unevenly over time. It was a process that took decades. This is from 1892, and now we can see that Mission Bay is becoming more like a lake, enclosed by the Long Bridge. This is also, this was done by real estate developer map. It's very fanciful. Look, it's just all a nice broad plain where you can build your house and your industry. No problem at all. Green lawns everywhere. Just buy some land. But the map did capture, I think it's more accurate than it's not, the back of a little building here, which is near the rolling mills and the ironworks. And that's that building. This is not the first Potrero Police Station. It's the second. The first was on 3rd Street up between 22nd and 23rd. I couldn't find a picture of it. I couldn't find an old Sanborn map of it. Are you all familiar with Sanborn maps? Some of you, I live in awe of these people to this day. For those of you who don't know, the Sanborn Company made fire insurance maps. What they did is and we'll see some coming on, they made maps that they would sell to insurance companies to assign rates. And they were very concerned with, is it made of wood? Is it made of brick? Is it concrete? What are the firefighting capabilities? Their maps are so stellar, and we'll see some of those going forward. But this is about 1891. And this police station is sitting on right near 20th and 3rd, right near the Pleasant one, but across the street where American Can is. They're renting this building, and that's going to be important going forward. But the police station is part of something that happened in the 1880s. The police chief then said, we need to have district stations all over the city. Before it was fairly centralized, and they picked various points. This was made much later, but obviously Potrero Point was an important place to have a police station because you had so much heavy industry, so many laborers down there. And here, this is from 1891, I love it. 136 arrests, and it's infested with tramps and thieves. Infested with tramps and thieves. Yeah, so here we exactly, I love it. Philomena Faulkner, alias the Galloping Cow. Now, she wasn't a thief in Potrero Point. This is actually, I think she was Midwinter's Fair era. But this is an important point. The San Francisco Police Department was the first department that started taking lots of photos of criminals. It was the first department that used fingerprints. So it's fairly innovative. So the police station you saw, that wood frame building, it was built at the amazing cost of $1,400. And here we're talking about it being moved to its new location, but it's not going to stay there too long. This is the 1905 Sanborn map that I mentioned. Yellow means wood frame in this map, and I've got the police station circled up there at the top, sort of top center right. But I've also highlighted some strips that the Sanborn people felt important to write down, which is in the upper left, hill 60 feet above street. And this lower long linear street, hill 35 feet above street. Remember, we saw that image where 3rd Street was in a canyon. This is part of that canyon. This picture is taken from that 60-foot hill. We're looking down pretty much at near 20th and 3rd. The blue arrow at lower right is pointing to the back of the police station. So 20th Street is not opened, obviously. And this was the case with a lot of areas still at this point in the 1890s at Potrero Point. Beyond, you can see that's the Union Iron Works building there. So this is another view from about the same spot up on that same ridge. I know a lot of people, you've done programs on Irish Hill before, so I'm not going to try and go that deep, but I still, approaching this area for the first time for me, I loved picking out these little areas. Follow the two arrows. We can see the little gable roof where it says AA and BB. Those buildings are still there. And so it's possible now to sort of recreate this. We can flip back and forth again. Pretty amazing amount of work that was going on there. And they were pulling those hills down, and they were paving streets and filling the bay with them. So, by only 13 years after it's built, they're thinking we need to have a better police station than the one we have, and the city owns a lot on the corner of 20th and 3rd, right near the other one. And what's true then is true now, that sometimes government goes after the least likely spots to build, but they're going to do it. There's the lot where the police station, and there's the old one, and that's where the new one's going to be. They're just going to move it essentially across the street. This is taken right after the 1906 earthquake. We're looking down the line of, I believe, 19th Street. That's St. Teresa's Church at the left at 19th and Tennessee. And that is those are Army tents set up for refugees from the earthquake. The arrow is pointing basically to the lot that it's been cut down a little bit, but where the police station is going to be. Just to the right of that, you can see a 3-story building. I believe it was a saloon. It's still there, which is wonderful. That building is still there. It's been much altered. It doesn't look like a Victorian building now, but it's still holding on. And so now we're looking again at the lot. So I found this little mention, I loved it. We're breaking up the contractors are breaking up the hill, and we're using it to fill the roads in Potrero Point. After the earthquake, there was such a huge amount of rebuilding that went on to the city. An army of laborers descended upon San Francisco, and the rebuilding went on for decades. This was also a chance for the city to modernize itself for the first time. A first wave of modernization. It's going to go through other ones over time, but they're replacing schools, they're replacing the police departments all over the city. And they kept such, again, I said it's wonderful to be a historian, they kept such good records. This is out of the city annual reports. And we're talking about the new Potrero Police Station at 20th and Kentucky. And we know from this that it has a business office with public lobby, a private office for the captain. We know it's made of Oregon pine and things like that. I just love that they did this every year. The architect, who's not named on here, was a guy by the name of Alfred I. Coffey. Coffey was born in San Francisco in the 1860s. He trained as a draftsman. He specialized in doing public buildings, and he became the city architect between 1910 and 1912, which was, again, a huge period of rebuilding that was going on in the city. This is, I believe, Catherine Dumani was kind enough to share this with me. I believe this is some of the original drawings, so it's wonderful that we can see the building in its original state. The style is Mission Revival, mainly because of that parapet that's on the front with a little cartouche opening on it. This was really popular at this point and remained popular for decades. By the early 20th century, we had enough distance from our Spanish past that we could start thinking about it romantically, and this Spanish style, which became sort of Mediterranean Revival, became a favored style for institutional buildings. We really have two styles for institutional buildings here in the city. The Civic Center is a direct reaction to the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, which was the city beautiful, the classical revival, big balustrades and things like that. We have a whole layer of that across San Francisco, sometimes in the steps we see in hilly parts of the city and public buildings, and then there's a big layer of Mission Revival and Mediterranean Revival in our institutional buildings. So this is the first and earliest picture I found of the building. The San Francisco Metropolitan Transportation Authority has a wonderful archive that's come online. They took lots of pictures of their track work. And here we have the police station on the right-hand side. This is 1914, which is just after it's been completed. It was completed in 1914, and we're looking down. Again, this is 3rd at 20th.
There are no street lights.
No street lights. Coffey didn't just do the Potrero Police Station. He also did the Richmond Police Station a little bit earlier. This is same architect, same time period. This is the old Hall of Justice, which was across from Portsmouth Square. This is after the 1906 earthquake. The same year that they are working on the building of the Potrero Police Station, forgive me, it was 1912, not 1914. The photo's 1914. They built the new Hall of Justice, and this lasted until the 1960s when it was demolished. This is now where the Hilton is. If you know it, by Portsmouth Square. Kind of sad to lose this building. And this is the classical revival style I was talking about. So we have Spanish, and we also have this classical revival. Coffey designed this building, which opened the exact same year. This is the Bayview Police Station, and it's still down there on Newcomb Avenue near 3rd. Here it is today. Same architect, same time period. He also did the North Point Police Station over off of Greenwich, and this is still around. It's been sold and converted to a private residence, but they kept some of the details. We still got the jail cell in there. I think it's cool. So many years passed, and Coffey also designs the Southern Police Station. This is at 4th and Clara Street in the south of Market. It is still there. This is a little bit more of an ebullient form of Mediterranean revival. In 1913, there was a fair in San Diego, and a lot of the buildings, if you've ever been to Balboa Park, are done in this style. They redid the Mission Dolores, what's now the Mission Dolores Cathedral. It was a much plainer building when it was completed, and then they updated it again a little bit later. And then his final police station was the Taraval Police Station in 1927. Again, this is all the same architect that did the Potrero Police Station. He also did some buildings you might know. This is the Stanyon Park Hotel at the corner of Stanyon, right by Golden Gate Park there, if you turn on Fell Street. He did the Southern Pacific Hospital on Fell Street, which is still there and a city landmark. This is the University Mound Old Ladies Home. He did this in conjunction with Martin Rist. It's one of his last buildings. This was 1931. This is also a city landmark. So we talked about the police station. This is the 1914 Sanborn map, a detail from it. We see the police station, but we see a building behind it that has an X. And the X is the Sanborn hieroglyph for it's a stable. And we can see just a little bit of it poking out in this photo. And here we have, again, an original drawing of it. It had room for 15 horses, and there's a hayloft up top, sanitary food trays for the horses. Because we forget how important it was. This is 1911. The mounted police force was huge in San Francisco. They didn't have their first patrol car until about 1908, but horses remained in use until 1928. 1934 waterfront strike. It took a lot, and of course we still have police horse stables in Golden Gate Park today. But at a certain point in time, I mean, that's how you got around. Now, having horses were also important for getting people to hospitals, and so now we're going to talk about the other building there. San Francisco had a unique system of emergency hospitals. It was unlike any other city in the country. The first sort of public emergency hospital was an adjunct to the city jail in the basement of City Hall. And as you might imagine, it was a fairly crude affair. And in the 1890, William Randolph Hearst hired a reporter to fake as though she was sick on a city street and see what happened, to write about her experience. Well, first they put her in a totally uncomfortable wagon. They took her to the hospital in City Hall and made her drink mustard water. I don't know what mustard water is. The doctor manhandled her very roughly, and when she wrote about it, it was a public scandal. and they decided they needed to do something about it, so they made a emergency hospital in the basement of City Hall 2 years later. This is going to be the nexus of the city's emergency hospital system. Now, I found this is 1898. I highlighted at the bottom, the Potrero Police Station is only provided with a wagon which has no accommodation for carrying a man who's been badly injured. This could be substituted for a patrol wagon, yada, yada, yada. So the police are already sort of taking the job of picking up people who are injured at Potrero Point. And as you might imagine, the industrial accidents that could happen down there were terrible. You know, this is big, heavy machinery. This is crushed hands, crushed skulls, things like that. The newspapers of the era did not shy away from headlines such as, head squashed to jelly. I found that one. So, but again, the emergency hospital that is next to the police station is not the first one. This is a Sanborn map from 1914. We can see St. Teresa's Church no longer there. This is 3rd Street, north of 18th, or 19th, excuse me, and we're looking at the west-hand side, and we see the Potrero Emergency Hospital, and they, of course, also have a stable for their ambulance. It was 1903 that this was constructed, and this is a photo taken, again, around 1910. If you look on the left of the arrow, you can just make out the word hospital sitting there. The building's still there. I think this is 2150 to 2154 3rd Street. It's obviously been converted to flats, but that is the original Potrero Emergency Hospital. Obviously, it proved a little bit inadequate, and so they're going to build a new one, not going to be designed by Alfred I. Coffey. It's another guy named George de Colmesnil, forgive me. He was in a firm called Miller and de Colmesnil, and they had a lot of contracts around this time. You can see some of the work they're doing. They're building, again, fire stations, schools, things like that. Interesting point about this firm, they hired in 1907 to help with all the work they had rebuilding San Francisco, a young draftsman named Timothy Pfluger. And Timothy Pfluger proved to be an apt pupil, and eventually Miller and de Colmesmil is going to become Miller and Pfluger. And Pfluger is going to go on to design buildings like 450 Sutter and the AT&T building, and become the city's premier Art Deco architect. So, but he was respectful, obviously, of the architecture of the police station, and he built the Potrero Emergency Hospital, which follows 2 years after the police station. Police station's 1912, then followed 1914. Probably was not the most advanced work, but it was, again, different than other cities. The first emergency hospital was the Park Hospital. It was built in 1902. So Potrero is following 1903. It's rapidly high on the heels. It's one of the highest need areas of the city, again, because of all the industrial works. This is the Mission Emergency Hospital. First it was at 22nd in Potrero, and then it was moved to 23rd in Potrero. Obviously, they went to cars, I think around 1912, 1914, somewhere in there is when you first have motorized ambulances. This is the, oh Lord, Harbor Emergency Hospital, which was originally at the foot of Clay Street. It moved around a little bit and eventually was on top of the Broadway tunnel. This is the final one that was built. This is the Alamany Emergency Hospital. This was built in 1933. When they opened this one, they moved the equipment from the Potrero Emergency Hospital into it, and they closed Potrero. So it operated from just 1914 to 1933. I think because with motorized transport, they would just take people to Mission. They'd also built bridges, you know, 18th and 19th and 20th. There was just better connections to get over to Mission Hospital. And again, this is obviously pre-101 days. This area has a really rich transit history, too. So this is Kentucky at 20th, or 3rd and 20th. If you look right there, this is 18th and 3rd Street. You can see the train is coming out and to make a right-hand turn. Can anybody think of any city bus that makes a right-hand turn at 18th and 3rd? Something called the 22 Fillmore? Still making that exact same turn today. And look at what a different viewpoint. So I spent, you know, I'm in Tallahassee for 2 months, and I'm looking at this, and then I came out last month to do a site visit, and I looked down the same vista, and it's a little jarring. This is a photo taken from one of those ridges. We're looking towards the clearing across from the police station and the emergency hospital, which are at sort of center right. It's going to become a track loop for United Railroads. Muni didn't own all the streetcar lines at that point. And so now they've cleared it, and they're going to make this track loop. And again, I told you that they love to take pictures of all their streetcar work. So we get this wonderful panorama in 1918. By the way, this is, I think, August 1918, December 1918. So they're moving fast. And they take various shots from inside the track loop. We get the hospital and the police station. There's a nice close-up of the buildings. This will be useful when they restore them. We go around the corner and we see the new administration building for the Union Iron Works, now the Pier 70 building that was just built. We turn a little bit to the right, we still see Irish Hill. They haven't cut that one down yet, but we'll get there. We'll get there. We have to expand the gas works, so we'll get this little bit of hill yet. They put the track loop in right at about the right time because it's now the Bethlehem shipyard, not the Union Iron Works. These are some of the ships being built there for World War I in 1918. That lot behind the police station and emergency hospital, we got another civic building. This was built in 1925. This is fire department station number 16, still there. And then eventually the turning loop becomes the site for American Can. So now we're sort of taking a picture in front of the police station. American Can was built out in 3 phases. Some buildings came in 1923, then 1929. This is taken right around, I think this is the early 40s. We'd just gone through the Depression, so people are still driving really old cars, and they're not going to be able to really buy new cars until after World War II. This is taken in 1929 of American Can. American Can is going to become the biggest, this facility, biggest can manufacturer on Earth, here in the Potrero, on Earth. So again, here's our police station. The reason we have a lot of good pictures of this, I want to talk a little bit about, I haven't found a ton about, I haven't gone through the police records yet, and I don't suspect there's going to be any hugely scandalous cases. They are handling things like guys fighting, guys being drunk, petty thievery, people breaking in, that sort of thing. But we have a lot of pictures of the police in this town because of this man. This is Jesse Brown Cook. He has a whole collection that's on Calisphere, the website, if you ever use it, 8,000 photos. They're all scanned. He worked on the Chinatown squad. He became police chief, and then he became police commissioner. And he took lots of candid photos of the police department. Look at those mugs. Man, oh man, look at these guys. Obviously, I'm having fun here, but I can't help it because there's so many that are like this. Gentlemen, oh, that looks like you have a very strong wrists and a hand there. Now I'd like to see you beat the crap out of each other. Go at it. There you go. That's good training for the police force. And there he is. He's standing at the left-hand side. He's, you know, had all these great photos. The police department likes to swim. So, this was taken around 1920. This is around 23rd in Illinois. The Western Sugar Refinery was expanding during this period, but also was Station A and the gas works there. I didn't talk about Station A too much. When we talked about the Potrero Gas Works, Spreckles, after he builds the sugar refinery, he decides to compete and build a power station there, which becomes the most modern and most powerful station on the West Coast, steam plant, and it's called Station A. Now, he's smart, and he eventually sells out, but keeps an interest, and there's a merger and another merger, and then it's Pacific Gas and Electric. In the 1920s, they're not manufacturing gas as much. And to manufacture gas, you basically cook coal to get the gases that come off. It's a wonderfully environmental friendly procedure, and all the waste from it is very nice. And when you dump it in the bay, it's completely inert and doesn't hurt anything. Well, now they're starting to exploit sources of natural gas, and they need big gas holders for it. So they start building these gargantuan gas holders. That is the sugar refinery in 1926, I believe. The ships came in bringing sugar from Hawaii, which was unloaded at the wharves there, and then it went through a series of purifying things to get your white sugar. Interesting aside, Filipinos, Japanese, populations here in the Bay Area, a lot of it has to do with the sugar industry. Hawaiian sugar industry was controlled from the Bay Area, you know, C&H sugar, California and Hawaiian sugar. And they imported workers, cheap labor, and so San Francisco became a natural entrepot for those workers when they left the sugar plantations. This is to give you an idea of the gas holder they're building in 1929. This is a lovely photo where they do a juxtaposition with the St. Francis Hotel. So there's that last little bit of Irish Hill that I was telling you about. We got to go after that. We're going to follow that in time. Take a look at that little tower there. Now we're moving. That's the same spot. So we've got this hill with houses on it. No hill with houses on it. But keep your eye on the little hill. Still there. If you didn't have to get rid of it, then you didn't get rid of it. This is, I'm sure you're all familiar, this is that wonderful 1938 aerial set. We're just taking a look at Potrero Point. A little close up of the building, you can see the stable is still there. This is where I'm going to humble myself before you. I don't know how the emergency hospital was used between 1933 and 1971. If anybody knows, please come up and we'll talk about it. On the 1950 Sanborn map, it shows up as classrooms, but I just haven't come across the use yet. This is the police station, still important. This is a strike in 1941 at Union Ironworks, but by 1943, we've got it all worked out. This is the shipyard workers, and we're looking down the line of 20th Street there, back towards 3rd Street. American Can is at upper left, the administration building is at right. World War II is the transformative event in the Bay Area. 1906 is one thing, but World War II shifted the demographics of the Bay Area. It changed everything. It can never be underestimated how important World War II was to the history of the Bay Area. This is the 1950 Sanborn I was telling you about. That's why I said it's labeled as classrooms. We can see that the stable is still there. Now it's got a little A on it, which means that they're parking cars in it. Chewing gum factory behind it. American Can still expanded in the 1950s. I'm sure you all know this building. It's still there today. What an incredible facility. This is taken in the early 1960s. We can see those gas holders looming over the neighborhood. By this point, the sugar refinery has been torn down. If you look at the extreme right-hand side middle, you can see the PG&E on that stack. They're going to build a new power generating unit there called Unit 3 in the 1950s. That's the one that just went offline, I believe, in 2011 or 2012. It was owned by Morant, but they're going to build that there. And the old gas works is still there as well at this point, but it's going to be torn down. This is just a little map of the various historic districts that are in the area to recognize it. They have different ones. There's the Central Waterfront 3rd Street Industrial District, of which the police station and emergency hospital are a part. We can see the Dog Patch Landmark District, which is there as well, and then Pier 70 is its own beast. And then that's it. Thank you so much.